almost dark, they would not see him easily. He kept a small hill between himself and the police and moved in within gunshot range. He could see the rocket like car resting on its single rail, waiting for a passenger to enter, to touch the button which would activate the tiny rocket engines and move it forward, ever and ever more swiftly, until it reached the acceleration of the roads, and slid over and became a part of the road. Moving carefully, he slipped from rock to rock, closer to the car and the men who guarded it. Suddenly the bay of a hound cut through the gloom. Two small brown dogs with the men, straining at their leashes. He hadn't counted on that. Swiftly he took cover and lined his sights with the blue uniforms. Before they knew even his approximate location he had cut them down, and the dogs also, and raced wildly down the remainder of the hill to the car. Fare may be calculated from the accompanying charts, and will be collected when your car has taken its place on the roads, said a little sign near the cockpit. Krenner studied the dashboard for a moment, then jammed in the button marked "Forward," and settled back. The monorail slid forward without a sound, and plunged into a tunnel in the hill. Out the other side, with ever-increasing acceleration it slid alongside the gleaming silver ribbon, faster and faster. With growing apprehension, Krenner watched the speedometer mount, past 200, 220, 40, 60, 80. At 300 miles per hour the acceleration force eased. The car suddenly swerved to the left, into a dark causeway, and then into the brightly lighted plastiglass tunnel. He was on the roads. Alongside the outside lane the little car sped, moving on an independent rail, sliding gently past other cars resting on the middle lane. An opening appeared, and Krenner's car slid over another notch, disengaged its rail, and settled to a stop on the central lane of the road. The speedometer fell to nothing, for the car's motion was no longer independent, but an integral part of the speeding rail itself. 300 miles per hour on a constant, non-stop flight across the rolling land. A loudspeaker suddenly piped up in his car. "Welcome to the roads," it said. "Your fare collector will be with you in a short while. After he has arrived, feel free to leave your car and be at ease on the road outside. Eating, resting, and sleeping quarters will be found at regular intervals. You are warned, however, not to cross either the barriers to the outside lanes nor the barriers to the freight carrying areas front and rear. Pleasant traveling." Krenner chuckled grimly and settled down in his car, his automatic in his hand. His fare collector would get a surprise. Down the road a short distance he saw the man approaching, wearing the green uniform of the roads. And then he stiffened. 3 blue uniforms were accompanying him. Opening the car door swiftly, he stepped out onto the soft carpeting of the road, and raced swiftly away from the approaching men. They saw him when he started to run. Ahead he could see a crowd of passengers around a dining area. A shout went up as he knocked a woman down in his pell-mell flight, but he was beyond them in an instant. His foot hindered him, and his pursuers were gaining. Suddenly before him he saw a barrier, a 4-foot metal wall. No carpet beyond it, no furnishings along the sides. The freight area. He hopped over the barrier and plunged into the blackness of the freight tunnel as he heard the shouts of his pursuers. "Stop! Come back! Stop or we'll shoot!" They didn't shoot. In a moment Krenner came to the first freight carrier, one of the standard metal containers resting on the steel of the road. He ran past it and the next. The third and fourth were open cars, stacked high with machinery. He ran on for several moments before he glanced back. They weren't following him any more. He could see them, far back, where the light began, a whole crowd of people at the barrier he had crossed. But no one followed him. Odd that they should stop. He centered his mind more closely on his surroundings. Freight might conceal him to get him off the roads where no passenger station would ever let him through. He climbed to the top of a nearby freight container and slipped down. Chunks of rock were under his feet, and he fell in a heap on the hard bed. What possible kind of freight? He slipped a lighter from his pocket and snapped it on. Coal! A normal freight load! He climbed back up and looked along the road. No pursuit. An uneasy chill went through him. This was too easy. To ride a coal car to safety, without a single man pursuing him. To where? He examined the billing on the side of the car, and he forgot his fears in the rush of excitement. The billing read, "Consignment coal, 20 tons. Markson Foundries, via Pittsburgh Private Cutoff." His car was carrying him to Markson! His mind was full of the old, ugly hate, the fearful joy of the impending revenge. Fortune's boy, he thought to himself. Even Sherman could not have done so well, to ride the rolling roads, not just to Pittsburgh, not to the mountains, but right to Markson's backyard. He shivered with anticipation. Pittsburgh was only a few hundred miles away, and at 300 miles an hour. Krenner clenched his fists in cruel pleasure. He hadn't long to wait. An hour passed slowly. Krenner's leg was growing stiff after the exertion of running. Still no sign of life. He eased his position, and stiffened when he heard the little relay box above the consignment sheet give a couple of sharp clicks. Near the end. He hugged himself in excitement. What a neat trick, to ride a consignment of coal to the very yards where Markson would be. The coal yards which he might have owned, the furnaces, the foundry. There would be men there to receive the car from the line. Well, he could remember the men, day and night, working and sweating in those yards and mills. There would be men there to break the car and empty it. He was in old clothes, farm clothes. He would fit in so well. Soon as the car slowed he could jump off, and simply join the other men. Or he could shoot if he had to. A little agility in getting out of the car, and a little care in inquiring the way to Markson's office. The car suddenly shifted to the outer lane. Krenner gripped a handle on the inside and held tight. He felt the swerving motion, and suddenly the car moved out of the tunnel into the open night air. He climbed up the side and peered over the edge. There were 5 cars in the consignment. He was on the last. Traveling almost at road speed along the auxiliary cutoff. Swiftly they moved along through the night, through the edge of the Pittsburgh steel yards. Outside he fancied he could hear the rattle of machinery in the yards, the shouts of men at their work. Making steel was a 24-hour proposition. Then they were clear of the first set of yards. The car made another switch, and Krenner's heart beat faster. A white sign along the side said, "Private property, keep off, Markson Foundries line." Soon now they would come to a crunching halt. Men would be there, but his gun was intact. No matter how many men he met, he had to get to Markson. The little car shuddered a little, but the exhilaration continued. They were rising high in the air now, above the foundries. He looked down and could see the mighty furnaces thrusting their slim necks to the sky. A bolt of fear went through him. How far did the automatic system go? Automatic loading of coal from the fields, automatic switching onto the rolling roads. Automatic transfer of cars onto a private line which led the cars to the foundries. Where did the automatic handling stop? Where did the men come into it? 27-year-old concepts slid through his mind, of how freight was carried, of how machines were tended, of how steel was made. In a world of rapidly changing technology, 27 years can bring changes in every walk of life, in every form of production, even steel. A voice within him screamed, "Get off, Krenner, get off! This is a one-way road." He climbed quickly to the top of the car to find a place to jump and turned back, suddenly sick with fear. The car was going too fast. The first car had moved with its load to a high point on the elevated road. A thundering crash came to Krenner's ears as its bottom opened to dislodge its contents. Without stopping, without men, automatically. From below he could hear a rushing, roaring sound, and the air was suddenly warmer than before. The next car followed the first, and the next. Krenner scrambled to the top of the car in rising horror as the car ahead moved serenely, jerked suddenly, and jolted loose its load with a crash of coal against steel. 20 tons of coal hurtled down a chute into roaring redness. 27 years had changed things. He hadn't heard men, for there were no men. No men tended the fires. Glowing, white-hot furnaces, Markson's furnaces, which were fed on a regular, unerring, merciless consignment belt, running directly from the roads. Efficient, economical, completely automatic. Krenner's car gave a jolt that threw his head against the side and shook him down onto the coal load like a bag of potatoes. He clawed desperately for a grip on the side, clawed and missed. The bottom of the car opened, and the load fell through with a roar, and the roar drowned his feeble scream as Krenner fell with the coal. The last thing he saw below, rushing up, was the glowing, blistering, white-hot maw of the blast furnace. End of section 5.